What's up, YouTube? We've talked theory, we've talked runtimes. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty details of code. So we are going to create a list of strings here, and we're going to call them words. Recall that when we create an array, we have to give a maximum size of the array. So we're going to use 1 here, which means our words array cannot grow and it cannot shrink. Now, if we wanted to use an array list, we would use ArrayList, and then let's just call it a word list. There's a new array list. But if you look here, look at this code, we don't see any mention of string. How do we know that a string is inside of the array list? Well, the way we do this is we use something called a generic. And generics are can also be called a type parameter, also known as the diamond of death, but they're really not that bad. They're really helpful, actually. So when you want to tell an array list that you're full of strings, you use the greater than and less than sign. You create this little diamond here, and you put in the class that's inside of your collection. In this case, the collection is an array list. And you want to do it for sure on the left-hand side. You can also do it on the right-hand side, but it's not required. In fact, I find it a little bit easier if you omit it, because Java will figure out what you're talking about anyways. So one thing that we gain when we use a collection built in Java instead of an array, we get some quality of life things. As an example, printing is so much easier now, thank goodness. So one thing we can start doing is we can start adding to this array list and printing out what we see. So let's add hello. I think you know where this is going. So if we add hello, we print it out. Hello's right here. Now we do world. Hello world. Now let's do one more. And let's add delete me. So if we do this here, we have delete me at the end. And obviously, as you can tell, adding is adding to the end of the list here. You can insert, and we'll show that in a second. But and let me put that down. Let's show insert. But we also want to show a delete here. So let's do words list dot delete, or remove, excuse me. Now there's 2 ways we can do this. We can do this by providing the thing we're trying to delete. So that is the string delete me, and that will work. Or we can provide an index. Index 2. Now, you can see that we've deleted this correctly. Now, I want to say that I've done some testing with this, and if you have an array full of integers and you try to delete an integer, or an array list full of integers and you try to delete that integer, Java will interpret this as an index. So be very careful when you're messing around with array lists of integers. So we've talked about delete. Let's talk about insert. So word list dot insert. Oh, there is no insert. Oh, there you go. Oh, yes, it is. So we've talked about deleting. Now we can actually do an insert where we add with an index here, and then something to put inside. So if we're going to add to the beginning, we could say attention. Now we run this once more. Hello world. Attention, hello world. Okay, cool. We also get some other things too. We can ask the word list if it's empty. System out println word list dot is empty. And we can also ask it for its size, which is pretty helpful. Now, to give you a little bit of just kind of intuition here, I find people really appreciate using is empty over size. So if you're asking if something is empty, you know, people do that with this dot is empty function. They don't check to see if the size equals 0. You can, but it's, you know, it's a little bit more readable. All right, we've talked about size and is empty. Now I want to show you one more thing, which is we're going to work with a for loop. Now, a traditional for loop, you create an integer to start at, and you have some sort of case for the integer to grow, and then you actually have the instruction to change the integer here. So we have I starts at 0 as long as I is less than the size of words list I++. And what we can do here is I'm going to take the system print and I'm going to .get I. Recall get is basically the same thing as an access for an array. So we run this. We can see attention, hello world, and that's great. Let me comment this out to make that output a little bit easier for everybody to see. Now there's another way we can do this using another Java sort of fundamental here. If we don't really care about index, we're not trying to go through a subsection of the array, or we're not doing something with these indices like we're accumulating them for further, I don't know, analysis. What we can do is we can change this for loop function to use a for each function. And a for each function, the first thing you do is you tell the for loop what type is inside. We know this is a string. You give that string a name. So we know that this is a word list. So obviously a word is inside. And then what you do is you provide the collection you're iterating over. So ours is word list. Now right here you'll see we're going to get rid of that word list.getI and instead replace it with word. And we're going to get the exact same output. Now we've really just created an array list and we've messed around with it. We've done some work with it. I want to tell you one last thing here, and this is a little bit of an advanced topic, and we'll talk about this more when we get really deep into generics. But generics are kind of funny here. When you are saying, hey, Java, I want to tell you about this array list, and it's full of strings, it's called word list, and I want you to make sure that it is truly an array list. That's kind of redundant. So what you can do is you can change this to say, hey, Java, there's this collection, and it is a list of strings. I want you to call it words list. And it is, in fact, an array list of strings. Now, the change there is that I made sure on the left-hand side, we are talking about a list, not an array list. Because we're saying, hey, this is a list interface full of strings, and we want the concrete implementation to be an array list, we've actually created a little bit more flexibility within our code here. While the flexibility doesn't help us in this particular piece of code because we're writing a really naive piece of code, when you start writing code and shipping libraries to people and creating components that plug into each other, you want to be as vague as possible when it comes to APIs. So if you, instead of using array, like asking for an array list in a function, and instead asking for a list, you're allowing anybody to supply any type of list that go into that function, and you create a lot of flexibility for them. And this pays many times over when you're writing APIs. This has been a lot of fun. I hope you have enjoyed this video. I love getting into the code with you guys. Please like and subscribe.